welcome to the Raptors Republic weekly podcast. This one breaking down what happened at the draft, how we feel about it, and what it might mean for the future. Guest today, a very special one, his third time on since the draft cycle started. If you can get the best, you get them. There'll be a diverse set of voices talking about a lot of the Raptors moves, but PD Webb, Director of Research and Development with Cerebro, and writer on Patreon, and a lot of people love it. Let's Watch Film on YouTube. You can find that at PD Webb. Just type that in, PD space Webb. Mr. Webb, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. This is, the calm before the storm that is the 2022 draft cycle. I give myself a couple days where you just kind of reflect, take it easy, do a couple podcasts, think about the draft that happened, kind of think about mistakes you made or trying to understand what teams did and their thought process, because that's always big scouting the next cycle. This is one of my calmest times of the year, but thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to talk about one of the most influential picks in the draft and also two interesting second round picks as well. This is a fun one.
Mm-hmm. Paolo Banchero, is he your guy right now?
I don't have a number one yet. I've bounced between a couple of different guys. I have long been a AJ Griffin number one person, but I also haven't seen him play basketball in a competitive setting in almost 2 years. So that's a difficult one to keep number one. So I similar to last year where I kind of had like Cade and then just like an osmosis of question marks around Evan Mobley. I kind of have Banchero roughly one, but the same, like if AJ Griffin looks approximately on the same development track, like that's probably my number one. But we'll see them play for the same team next year. So
proving ground. Okay, so Blake Murphy, mutual friend of ours, it's shortly after the lottery, The Athletic did a mock draft, and he chose Scottie Barnes at 4, and he cited his reasoning as, well, I wanted to produce it as a thought experiment and see what happens if Scottie goes 4. Everybody's mocking 1, 2, 3, 4 with Cade, Green, Mobley, and Suggs. So he popped Barnes in there. As it turns out, after everybody gave him a bunch of crap and was like, this is unrealistic, why would you do this? You've ruined my life. Scottie Barnes goes 4. Just cliff notes. What are your thoughts on Barnes at 4?
I think it's a really interesting process. I think that there was an initial reaction that like this was a reach or that this was an unconventional choice. I think that also comes from the, like, I would say misinterpretation of Jalen Suggs as like a primary. I've always interpreted him as a connecting piece, sort of like a not entirely, different, but in the same idea of Tyrese Haliburton, where like he can struggle to get to his spots on his own. He's best playing within a system that creates a certain amount of angles and looks for him, and playing next to another creator. If you see him as that, like he's not necessarily a guarantee at 4, where if you see him as like hand him the ball and let him make a trillion decisions a game guy, you naturally are going to want to put him at 4. I think that the common consensus was the latter, but I mean, I'm very much in the former camp of like, you need to have a primary ball handler next to him at all times. This pick was so interesting because like Toronto is a very tight-lipped organization, or like even worse than tight-lipped. They don't say nothing, but the things that they say kind of come with the Cheshire grin. So there'll be some small leaks, but they feel very controlled. And you're left to sort of figure out, like, do I know that because it's true, or do I know that because they think that I think it's true? So they think that if they tell me the lies, I'll believe that it's true. And you're like, this is too much. And that's the worst place to be in. That's it. That's obviously how a lot of good organizations operate. Is just like sometimes telling you the truth, and then you overthink it. So when they went with Scottie, I mean, my first concern was like, is Pascal on this team next year? Is Kyle Lowry on this team next year? Because I think that the fit isn't necessarily a problem. I don't even think that the developmental fit, like thinking about him for the first 3 years, is necessarily a problem. But it is important when you're thinking about like what exactly is it that you want him to do if you also have 2 versatile forwards playing next to him most of the time. If it's one and it's OG, that's pretty easy to understand. OG will have much more of a creation role. Scottie will be more of a connector. But if he's the third, it's not that it's hard. It's just that you probably want him to be more of a connector, do more flashing and processing in small doses. Don't really think there's like an overlap in terms of like usages. I mean, Scottie's jumper is going to be difficult, or going to have like some difficulty translating, but I think that using him as a post flashes guy, or running some second side snub pick and roll, and you can do a whole bunch of really fun stuff, but not knowing who's going to be on this team does make the initial projection and the initial role sort of hard to think about, because so much seems to be in flux other than OG Anunoby and Fred VanVleet.
It's a messy team construction right now, especially, as you say, with so much in flux. Short plug, later on in the week, Henry Ward will be coming on to discuss team building, kind of with what the Raptors might be going for. So
I also assume it's going to be I assume there's also going to be some David Johnson talk.
There will be David Johnson talk, yes, for sure. Interesting player. But okay, let's get to the standout aspects of Scottie's game. He's the number 4 pick, and selecting that high, there should be several standouts. As you said with Jalen Suggs, connector more than primary. People who listen to the definitive Jalen Suggs podcast I did with Jackson Frank, you would have got that from us as well. Scottie Barnes, though, goes number 4. What are the major points of emphasis in his game that make him shoot up a draft board with so much momentum late and land in an organization that values those kinds of things?
I mean, I think you start with approach first. Scottie has always been a extremely high energy, high intensity, high communication player. He's a guy who needs to make noise, needs to clap, needs to, jump up and down, needs to touch the rim. Like, those are the things that get him going. And that's, for a team that just played a year in Tampa, a guy who so visibly loves basketball, can be a nice change of pace. At the end of the day, this is a job, but somebody who just truly loves it and enjoys nothing more than throwing down a dunk and then clapping in someone's face for about 5 seconds. That can bring a lot of joy to a team, and you'll, as the NBA has loosened its bench celebration restrictions, you can see how much that really gets people going to celebrate the achievement of others. And that's not fluffy stuff. It's on defense, if you sit close, or you sit at a summer league game, you can hear him from row 50. He's just shouting rotation, drop. You hear everything he has to say on defense. And for a rookie, that's a true standout, because most rookies know what they're doing on defense, but they can't communicate multiple positions at once. Part of that is, the way he's wired. Other parts of that are his experiences with Team USA in the youth sector, and also going to Montverde. And then finally he finished at Florida State, which is a place known for really nailing down the specifics of defensive responsibility. Patrick Williams, who went number 4 to the Bulls last year, went to Florida State for that exact reason, that he wanted to establish his communication, his rotation, and the minutia of defense as a fundamental part of his game. And he knew at other places he could shoot, but he wanted to get that down. Scottie's kind of the perfect embodiment of a lot of those ideas, and I think that if you just showed him to people and you ask what he's good at, you'd just be vibes. The vibes are awesome. And that's not nothing. You can tell how much he enjoys defense, how much he enjoys communication, and that energy to play hard basically every possession he's on the floor is a viable ability.
Okay, and so let's discuss the playmaking then. You can see a lot of broken playmaking. You can see a lot of transition playmaking, and just he makes good reads off the bounce, especially for his position. Came off the bench, Florida State. A lot of possessions as a primary for that style of basketball. What do you make of his playmaking so far? Because, with fans, you can always get he's Magic Johnson because he's big and he passes the ball. Or you could get, we don't have a guy who can even dribble. What do you find the range is for him there?
I would say that he processes the game extremely well. He's always been a guy who recognizes advantages and has a very good schematic understanding of what the defense is trying to take away. So he often makes the most dangerous pass in a particular situation. I think that Toronto, I have long been a believer in OG as a star and as a primary creator, a person who can create a primary load of shots. So I think that as long as you're playing against a tilted defense, Scottie's reads really will stand out because his handle is a struggle from a primary aspect. It's fine, especially in transition. He gets up to full speed. He has long strides. But in the half court, where his athleticism and his handle, areas of his game that are just not good, are really important to sculpt so that the weaknesses don't come through so much. I think that he can run pick and roll. You just have to divide. Every pick and roll should be sculpted. It should never just be like 1-4 flat. It should be on a Nick screen, on a snug pick and roll, coming off a secondary action, a flow into something, because he sets up screens well. He has an understanding of the angles. He has an understanding of the defense, but his ability to create advantage on his own is limited by his athleticism and his handle intersection right now. In transition, its own different thing, but in the half court, it is going to be something that needs to be schemed for specifically.
What you said about OG, we're probably going to steal time from Champagne as far as the conversation at the end of this podcast. I want to ask you more about that. But okay, handle. Jalen Suggs, very within himself. It speaks to being able to manipulate and to, create larger advantages off the bounce. What do you make of Scottie Barnes' handle, how it might develop and where it's at currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a flexibility thing mostly. I mean, he has really long arms, which is a gift and a curse as a handle. Because if you have really, really long arms, it just takes so long from the ball to get to 1 foot fully. Like if you go out of a hang dribble and it's all the way out, like that ball is 5 feet away from your center of gravity, then you have to go across, and so it gets all the way over to the other hand. But it is a longer process. It's often like why big guys get ripped a lot is because there's so much distance from the ball bouncing to the floor. It gives a lot of time for your small guards to get underneath and get it before it bounces back up to your hand. Flexibility is going to be a huge concern. He doesn't have a lot of wiggle. Oftentimes he just creates a smaller advantage and then outstrengths his way to the rim. In the NBA, it's going to be less feasible. It's also in the NBA, teams are going to be able to force him to shoot more. He took steps in the right direction in terms of like attempts. I think that he sort of had negative development on his jumper since his sophomore year of high school, where he was taking shots off the dribble. I think that there's the flexibility, the energy transfer that you see in his handle is also present in his jumper, which looks stiff. Like it just doesn't look like a dude who's comfortable shooting. He looks like a dude who's thinking about shooting a basketball and trying to sort of like memorize the steps. As a bad dancer, it looks like somebody who's trying to think of, okay, so it's up. It's left, then it's right there. There's a side step. Wait, no. It's up, then it's right. Then that's what it feels like him shooting. When he shoots best, it looks so much different. It looks like a confident dancer. But that rigidity to me speaks to his readjustment of his shooting over the years and trying to figure out what's most comfortable for him.
If you were scheming to, not that he's going to call for a lot of that early on in his career, but if you're scheming to mitigate his strengths, what would you be trying to throw at him?
I would just go under every screen. I would go under every screen and then force him to throw like weak side skips. It's not something that he can't do. It's just that like when you say like, okay, you're not getting any pass but that pass, it allows pre-rotation to the corner. So it allows everybody to know this is what's happening next. I mean, he's a guy who I would like to see volume as a big deal. Volume over percentages. Like I'm fine if he shoots 28% from 3 a game his rookie year. That would not be a concern for me. If it's on 1 attempt a game, like there's a problem. If it's on 3.5 or 4, we're in a good place because at least he's recognizing open shots. He perceives them as good shots for him. He's a good to great guy. This happens pretty commonly for guys who were raised in very winning situations where they have a little bit of what we in the scouting community call academy brain, where they do what's best for the team at all times. And if you're a bad shooter, you shooting is bad for the team. And so they pass up open shots, which would be a great shot for anybody else, but they, have some worries. And I would like him to just turn those worries out and get shots up. Obviously, there's going to be adjustments as he gets into the NBA. It's not in a particularly great place right now. Like I'm not going to lie to you. The flexibility is going to be important, but more than anything, it is the rhythm. The release looks fine. It's the middle part of the jumper that I would say is an issue. I think that's probably like, I mean, I can go deeper into the jumper as we go. I don't think he's super comfortable shooting off the bounce consistently. Like he'll take a couple here and there, but it's not, the process is very dependent on how he felt on a day-to-day basis. Footwork's okay, not phenomenal. I think a lot of this has to go with like he can't get shots off that quickly, both because of his handle, because of like the way that the rhythm of his jumper is, but also because like his athleticism is particularly non-reactive. So like he struggles to like hop 3 times quickly in a row. It takes him a moment to load each time. And so like, if he's doing a hang dribble to a side step, the hang, a little bit of a gather delay, sidestep, gather delay, and then shot, gather delay. So that power generation, he can generate a lot of power, but at times it can take him too long to do so. And since, basketball is a game of timing windows, if you're a little too late, then there's a dude with a 7'7" wingspan who's just flown in and gotten a fingertip to it, or even worse, scared you out of taking that shot. So now you're closely covered, you've pump faked, and everybody on defense knows what's happening.
Okay, 2 questions. Who is the best player with academy brain in the NBA? And then 2, Scottie Barnes, you talked about how you go under and then you use pre-rotation to mitigate the advantage of the pass he's making. How does he pass against pre-rotation? Does he outfox the defense when stuff like that happens? So those 2 cues.
Okay. The best player with academy brain. I mean, at times it's probably Patty Mills. The thing is that you can grow out of academy brain. We've seen this with guys who, some guys do, some guys don't. Some guys just find a role that is much more clear for them. It's not a flat thing of I'll do what's best for the team. It's for some guys, it comes to shooting. Other guys, it comes from they struggle to not do more than shoot. Academy brain affects different players differently. So for some guys, they can minimize their academy brain by going to a role that's a little more comfortable for them. So you'll find this in second or third draft guys where they bounce around the league a little bit and suddenly they're in a spot that looks perfect for them. Danny Green, probably a good case for this. He bounced around a little more than a couple teams, but we find something like that. And then you have guys who overcome it. I think Killian is going through this right now. Frank Ntilikina is going through this right now. It's not that this just affects French players or overseas players. You'll see this with Americans, and we have quite a few Americans in this specific class that have academy brain. Springer being another one who also went to usually it's just did you play for a really good high school? Did they, systematize reads? Are you always hunting for advantage? And that leads to guys who, if you can't shoot, can struggle to deal with the cognitive dissonance of I have an open shot, but I'm shooting it.
Okay. And as far as Scottie Barnes and
the rotation.
Yeah.
So I think that he gets it, but he can getting to a situation where you have to outfox the defense on the same read over and over again is a failure unto itself. You're playing a game with you're playing a casino game at that point where they already have the advantage. They know what's happening and they can always just throw more defenders and more looks. They have more options than you probably have counters, because even if they start pre-Xing out or they stunt and recover, or they sometimes won't send anybody to the corner to see what you do, to force it and force a long rotation. But at the end of the day, you keep going back to that read instead of doing the thing that actually breaks the coverage, which is shooting through it.
Mm-hmm.
Or rescreening, or finding a way to get 2 in the paint. The solution isn't with the pass necessarily. Sometimes it can be with the pass as an outcome, but you have to change your approach to make a defense change its approach, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then before we get to defense, 2 feet in the paint, downhill momentum, what is the, finishing craft, foul drawing craft, passing in the interior? Does he have the wraparound? Does he have the dump off? All this kind of stuff. Could he throw a lob on the short roll?
Yeah. I feel that's probably his best style of passing. Are these little, because he has really long arms, he can throw some really weird angles. So his dump off is really low. For a dude who's 6'7", 6'8". I think the thing that's going to be difficult is that he does not have vertical pop, and he's one of the guys who I think who tanked his standing reach to get a higher vertical number at the combine. So I think he tested 38, 37, which he's probably closer to 34, 33. And on his film, you can see that he really struggles to generate power quickly. So if you think about the best dude in the world at this is Marvin Bagley. Marvin Bagley's feet touch the ground, and his second jump is both lightning quick and gets as high as his first jump. And Scottie doesn't have that ability. He needs a lot of time to load, and he can't get as high the second time. Or, if it's off a drop step, then he can't get as high the first time because it's the same, power coordination. It's just not, involving a second jump. But I think he has some finishing craft. He's not a full extension guy. The problem is that he doesn't have a bunch of finishing variety because he can't go over the top. If you see, if you watch his dunk highlight reel, you'll notice it's a lot of length dunks. And sometimes he does a length dunk and then grabs and rips the rim. So it looks a lot tougher than it is. I think that attaching flexibility and attaching extra like quick twitch athleticism is going to be really important for his finishing, because it does limit his use as a 5 and it does limit his use as a flasher, because he will need extra craft. He will need weird finishing angles. He will need multiple finishing styles, because he can't just like go up and get it.
Do you have a reference point for a player that's done that in the past?
In regards to just like adding a lot of weird stuff?
Yeah, really refining the quick twitch stuff and kind of putting it into their game.
I mean, like if I had to say, like, I think there's two different things there. Like if it's for the just adding weirdness, like Boris Diaw is an example. Like Boris started his basketball life as a point guard. Then he was super athletic, and then he became a wine lover, and then he became super effective. Like it's a hilarious journey, but like you could, like, he has every finish. He's super strong. He could jump 40 on, if you put him up on the rack, but you didn't see that in games because he found so much of his effectiveness, not from using his particular, like his strangely awesome athleticism, but from, finding unique angles from guys that have improved their bounce. I feel like Jakob Partel did, especially later in his career. That's a much more difficult list of guys. It feels like you generally get marginally better. I don't think there's like, especially for guys that have been as a lot of guys who do get better come from sort of like the Pascal life track, where it's like, I didn't play basketball my entire life. I was in a low D1 program. I was off a national team radar. Like Scottie's been on the national team radar since he was like 14 years old. Like he's gotten the best training in the world basically for the past like 5 or 6 years. So the idea that like he's going to be exposed to some new training techniques is kind of difficult for me. I don't want to say his body is maxed out, but like those things have definitely been explored. And there might not be as much, like there's going to be quite a bit of athletic upside just, because of his frame. But the idea that there's like this, the priors are about as bona fide as they could possibly be just from athletic testing and performance aspect.
Excellent. Let's do quick jump shot doctor for Scottie Barnes. And I guess we'll start with catch and shoot stuff. A lack of dip, rigidity, something you talked about. But do you see a blueprint for improvement? And it doesn't have to be rapid, incredible improvement, but just improvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the feet. I don't love his rhythm. I don't think he has to be a hop guy. I don't think it would hurt. Sometimes it feels like his rhythm alters how much legs are in his jumper. He has a tendency of overarming. I mean, if you just sort of divide the body in half, ideally you want it to kind of be 50-50. He's probably going to be a guy who moves towards a 1.5 jumper. He was he's been a 2-motion guy up until college, and I feel like he started to smooth it out, but it's going to be a multi-year process. Most guys, it requires a calendar year of smoothing from 2 to 1.5 or 2 to 1. That's a good outcome. I'd say like 2 years is pretty normal to get to add in results. I would say stabilizing feet. I don't really have an opinion on no dip versus dip. I generally like guys who dip, just because, especially if you're a 1-2 guy, you just need something that establishes rhythm and flexibility are the general biggest concerns with Scottie. The release itself looks okay. I feel like it's pretty consistent looking. Some hand placement issues, but like these are minor things. Like hand placement issues generally don't turn you from like a 25% shooter to a 40% shooter. It's usually there's underlying things like hand-eye coordination, proprioception that are, the ability to create rhythm. Like those things are the things that cause you to miss jumpers. It's not like, oh, your thumb's in the way. For the most part, if that was just the issue, somebody would have said it and it would have been fixed.
Okay. So to put a pin in the offense, for a fan who's watching the game, what we're most likely going to see him have the most success with, it sounds like, is a second side pick and roll where he can get downhill, maybe flash passing chops, short rolling, and transition. Do you think that's a fair summary of what we might expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you might have some with like high pick and roll, but it wouldn't be like, he's not a lob catcher right now. It would be like to get him to clear out into a second side pick and roll. So like he'd run the pick and roll, they'd clear him out, and then his man would relocate a little bit. Then that can flow into like I think that his frame is obviously ideal for setting screens. Like he's a huge person, but the idea of him as a lob catcher is like sort of not realistic. Like he's not PJ Washington who can like really get up or anything like that. That's still going to be a while away. And I think that like there are some misunderstandings of how his athleticism works, which I'm sure we'll talk about with his defense.
I would like to combine he and Daniel Gafford, because Gafford has a lot of pop to me, like that upwards pop. Yeah, that would be really fun if you could do that. Okay, let's do defense. I want to bring up, because I want to talk about 1 through 5, and is that a real thing? Because Raptors fans, if you go into Twitter replies about defending 1 through 5, they will probably assert that OG is the best at it in the league, but even he can only guard certain aspects of the center's game. And he had really good success doing so against Daniel Tice, who is extremely small for the center position. And, you know, he had great games against Nikola Jokic, but that's being a hawk above the break where they're trying to, you know, establish a possession, and he's stealing point to wing or wing to point passes, but down on the block, you know, Jokic was getting everything he wanted. So what is your thoughts on 1 through 5? Do players often get there? And if so, does Scottie fit that?
Yeah, I'd say nobody's that. 1 through 5 is a fun idea. Because like every position has its own, like, is 1 through 5 mean that you are comfortable switching onto like De'Aaron Fox? Does it like,
right?
And also you can take post touches where you win against Joel Embiid. The player that you're describing appears to be God. Like that, just like that dude doesn't exist. Like prime Braun is essentially like, and prime Braun giving 100% could probably do those things for like 10 positions. So like switching 1 through, like being a 1 through 5 guy is, I think, needs to be clarified on what people mean. Because like if what you mean is that there are certain matchups where you are capable of guarding ones. Like there are, you know, if you play a team with a bigger body point guard, like if you play, you know, wherever Kyle Lowry signs it, you know, I think it's a foregone conclusion he's kind of gone. Say he signs with the Mavs. If you're playing the Mavs, like, could you switch on to Kyle Lowry? Probably. Does that make you 1 through 5? No, because Kyle Lowry is, you know, slower than the average one. You know, he's a little bit older. Yes, there are obviously challenges with him getting by you because his unique lower body strength and shooting gravity. But is that standard? And then for 5s, like if you guard the smallest 5, does that mean you can guard 5s? I think that what people generally mean when they say guard 1 through 5 is like that a player has positional versatility and could plug into different places. Like they have some point of attack stuff. They have
like
some
7 seconds are left on the shot clock and you switch out, and like it's not going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I think like switch everything guys is like really interesting because it's like, oh yeah, this guy could, you know, he can switch everything. I'm like, on who? Like switch everything on everybody? Because like that's not realistic. Like there's no 5 you feel comfortable with on an island against Zach LaVine. That's not a dude. Like even Draymond, you're like, this is not ideal. We have failed in this position if this is happening. Similarly, there's no wing that you like. Joel Embiid gets a post touch on them, and you're like, yeah, we're great. Don't send help. So I think that clarifying scheme, clarifying, what it is that needs to happen. So like, you know, like I think Scottie specifically is interesting because like I don't think Scottie is a frontside wing rim protector. That eliminates your ability to play 5 in many lineups unless you're playing with a 4 who's a great rim protector. But that means that like you're not really playing the 5. You kind of have a 4.5 and a 4. But the 4 is such a good weak side rim protector that it, you know, these ideas of playing 1 through 5 are interesting, but they exist in a contextual requirement. You know?
Okay, so my number one question, or sorry, I might have cut you off there.
No, I was just you're good.
Okay, so my number one question is, this is something Polar talked about at Skyfall for those who want to look up biomechanics on Twitter. But something he talked about was how what we see with Scottie picking, college guards up, it might not translate to the NBA at the same level because of his style of athleticism, because of the advantageous parts of his athleticism and the parts that haven't come along as much. You alluded to it with front side rim protection. Do you think that it's viable at all for him to kind of emulate the defensive profile that he had at Florida State in the NBA? And if not the whole thing, what aspects do you expect him to succeed at in the NBA?
So like Scottie's point of attack style like doesn't seem like it'll transfer to me a ton against guards, because like what he did is he overwhelmed them. He found the ball handler that had like the shoddiest handle or was like the least comfortable, and he's crowded him. And like in the NBA, players get used to being defended by guys with these monster wingspans who can cover ground and, get their hands on anything. And in college, like you just don't see that often. Even in the ACC, there's just not a bunch of dudes who are 6'8" who will slide with you.
You get locked in the knees.
Yeah. So like he very much like hunts weakness in guards, and like that's just not there's not that many NBA players who fit that mold. So I think that some of his switching onto guards is not will work, but it's going to work. It's like second units and specific ones where maybe a guard is like struggles with passing reads, and he's able to overwhelm them, and they don't see them, even like the cursory ones. That's feasible, but the idea of like you're good if there's a 1-4 pick and roll and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is coming off of it, like you're in a bad spot. That's not going to work out, because like if you crowd Shai's handle, he walks by you. So I think that like Scottie does have good horizontal athleticism. He moves his feet well. He covers distance. He can change direction pretty good. He has the arms to cover up mistakes in any technique that he has. But I think that he's going to have to relearn what's possible, because his tendency is to get aggressive. And in the NBA, if you're aggressive with the wrong guys, they cook you. Because like that finding weaknesses isn't going to happen. I don't mean this to say like he is a like lesser prospect because of it. It's just that his tendencies have to alter to be more of a mirror guy. I think Kawhi had this issue at San Diego State where he just like wanted Drew Holiday had this issue where like they just hunted people's handle. The minute that you exposed it, they ripped it from you. And in the NBA, that's just not like with Kawhi, things like, like Macklemore will happen where you find a guy with a weak handle and you rip him, 2 times in a row real bad. But for the most part, dudes handles are Teflon. So him being more of a mirror guy, yeah, it's going to take some tendency adjustment, but like that's extremely valuable. You don't have to rip guys every time down. That's just not how the NBA works. That being said, like if he can't overwhelm people, you probably don't want him on ones. You probably want him to take 2 through like the heavier 4s. You probably don't want him on like the super skinny 4s because they can shift him out of the way.
Excellent. Okay, and so if we're looking for what he's going to succeed at, particularly in the framework of the Raptors defense, Pascal Siakam is a guy who made his name, and he became much better at front side rim protection than I think a lot of people might have expected. But he made his name on court coverage. What do you think of Scottie Barnes' projection as a court coverage defender?
I think that that's probably his best role. Because also as a court coverage guy, like he's an extraordinary communicator. And the better communicator somebody is, the farther back you want them on the defense. Like this is why so many young bigs struggle with adjustments to the league. Is that like in the league, the 5 is the communicator. And so your job isn't just to talk through what's happening point of attack. It's to talk through every action on the floor simultaneously and cover your dude who, if you miss by a half step, a lob goes up and you get dunked on. That's a really difficult assignment. And if you put him on the weak side corner and you have him next to a rim protector, then he can call out everything and give you 2, high level communicators on the floor at the same time. He's going to have some navigation issues if teams target him to, get skinny through screens. Like he'll certainly energy his way through it, but he's not, he's not McCall where he's like capable. He's not McCall or Matisse or anything where like off ball there at heaven. It's more that he has good foot placement. He understands where he has to be, but he does have some circumstances where he just doesn't have the frame for moving in multiple directions, successively. If you play Boston, like you don't want him on Tatum because they'll just put him through the screen maze, and he's going to have some issues navigating it.
Okay. And with all those things considered, is there an outcome 50, 75, 85 that you're expecting for his defense? I know it's tough to put like a percentile outcome into defense since there's not really any defensive awards outside of, all defense and defensive player of the year. But is there something you think he can punch up at?
I mean, it really depends on how. It really depends on how he handles, like his improvement. If he gets more flexible, then we get a different archetype of guys he can handle. If he gets like to above average, if he gets to average pop, right now I would say he's like somewhere between far below and below average for a strong sideline protector. Then you can have him be the front sideline protector. I think that I have very little doubt that Scottie will be a very good defender. It's just targeting what he does well because he does have specific limitations, just like literally everybody does. Like Kawhi struggles with super shifty dudes. Like that's probably the best defender of my generation.
Okay. Okay, and then so let's discuss just as far as philosophy. Bobby Webster, when he was talking about the draft pick, he talked about having a bunch of guys who are of a similar size and build to OG and Siakam. Like have 5 of those guys out on the floor at once. What do you think of that? Just that in itself, and having a GM say that.
I mean, it's certainly a fun concept, but like one of the important things is different movement styles. Like OG moves kind of similar to Scottie. Like Scottie isn't as rangy in terms of movement. Like he's, his steps are a little bit shorter. He likes to hop up and down more. Where like OG, just all long strides. Like it sort of feels like everything's in that like 1950s animation style where the legs go on forever. And Siakam, I've always said like moves around like he's covered in petroleum jelly. Like I think that you can have guys who are similar size and a similar build, but they all can't move the same because then they have all the same defensive utility. So having guys who are all 6'9", but one of them, is really like kind of jitterbuggy. I know it's difficult to imagine a 6'9" jitterbug, but this sort of movement style. One guy that's a little bit on like the lankier, stridey side, one that's a little bit more on the football player build. That makes a lot of sense to me. They also have different skills. Like, I mean, if you have 0 advantage creators and 5, 6, 9 dudes, it's just going to be ball reversals until somebody jacks up a 17-footer. We've seen teams try to do that, obviously at lower talent levels, and like it struggles because one of them doesn't have the primary creator moveset and necessities. I think as a team building philosophy, it makes a lot of sense. I also think it explains some of the later picks, and one of the specific gripes that I have about one of the second round picks. But the idea that like if you can definitely build a very good defense out of this, and the offense, as long as they're good processors, and at least 3 of them are good shooters, will certainly hold its own weight as well.
And just for the listener, this will be expanded upon with Henry Ward in a few days. But it is really interesting. But that is the point I think that you bring up is ball reversals until you get the contested 17-footer. Who is breaking down the defense when you look at the Raptors roster and creating that big advantage? And if you're thinking, well, I saw Fred VanVleet get downhill and create a 3-point shot, 380 times last year. Yes, but what was the quality of the 3-point shot? How in tune, we talked about counters to the type of advantage you're creating earlier on with, outfoxing the defense. Fred was good at finding the guys forming up. The guys formed up so that the pass was available to be made. But a lot of the time, the ball was just going from the top of the floor to the sideline. And the Raptors need more solid advantage creation than that, typically. But we'll get into that more, I guess, when we talk about the second round guys a little bit. Okay, Scottie Barnes, expected outcomes, judging from what you know and what you think is the most, expedient and easiest things to progress with in the NBA according to his archetype. What are the outcomes you kind of think that we might see from Scottie Barnes, even if it's the 30%, the 50, the 75, the 90? Because if we look at Pascal Siakam, he's probably sitting at a really high percentile of his outcome.
Yeah, I would say 90. I would say like 99th percentile.
Right, according to what he was drafted at. OG Anunoby is also sitting at a decently high percentile. We'll talk about what that might become at the back end of the podcast, though. But for Scottie, what do you see, and what might you think it'll become?
So I said that there's kind of like, I think that there's two pretty, like, let's take the two like meatiest outcomes. Obviously there's like a one, there's the very tail end where it's like either he, completely forgets how to shoot and becomes a negligible offensive player, or he really, really, really learns how to shoot. And, then we're talking about something entirely different. Okay. We've talked about those. They're out of the way. I think the lower end outcome for him, which kind of covers like 50% and down, is like a very good rotational player who is on defense, who can, bounce between responsibilities well, who's capable of getting in passing lanes, who's his best in transition, and processes the floor very well, even if he can't create his own advantage. That's a playoff rotation player basically automatically. And if you can build even lineups around him where there's enough shooting and enough advantage creation, then it's probably a playoff starter. Like I would say those are like 50% to like 30% outcomes. Let's say 50 to 80%. So like these would be what we would probably classify as good. I mean, all of these are, I think that there's very little chance that Scottie Barnes is not like a meaningful playoff player, but I would say a good chance is that he shoots open jumpers. He does all those things, and he has the explosiveness and flexibility to navigate screens and protect a player. Then you have a player who is extraordinarily valuable in the playoffs, can probably play some 5, which like I do not think he can do right now. Because like, again, if somebody else is covering your, like if it requires a specific instruction, you kind of can't play that position. You're kind of just like, I don't want to say Potemkin center, but like you're sort of halfway doing a role and somebody else is replacing, there's an offset that's not like, it limits team construction in a way that like if you could straight up play the 5, it would be different. If he can play the 5 and navigate screens well enough to like guard 2s, I don't ever want him on 1s unless it's like straight up backup point guards that you just want him to harass for 94 feet just for like funsies. Which like I think you could at Summer League I would just have him do that for fun, just to be like, we want you to feel comfortable, and that will definitely get his engine revving. But like, yeah, I think both of those are meaningful or better players. I don't think that he like will ever become like a star in the traditional sense, or like his mixtapes are amazing. But like, if you think about upside in the sense of like, will this player win All-Star Game MVP? He doesn't necessarily have any. But if you think of upside of like, will this player help us win playoff games? Like team upside, will this player like make us proud to wear the jerseys and as fans? He has a ton, and like, there are bad players who fit that first category. Like they're like, your teams are still bad. The guy averages 36 points a game. It's like, you probably aren't having fun. Like you remember that playoff run? Would you call that fun? It seems like it was a lot of fun. Scottie is sort of a vision of a very winning player, which like seems like faint praise because like a lot of people want the fun guy. And sometimes they coexist, but like Kawhi wasn't necessarily a fun basketball player. He just did a lot of winning stuff and
just was a fun guy.
Yeah. And, I think Scottie exists in that same vein. It's just like with more clapping and vibes and enjoying outwardly.
Okay. There's one thing I do want to ask about, because I know some of the listeners are going to be disaffected by you saying you don't want Scottie on a 1 ever, because Raptors fans have seen Pascal Siakam take John Wall as a primary in a playoff series. They've seen Pascal Siakam as the primary for Russell Westbrook in regular season games against the Westbrook and George Thunder. What is the difference mainly between Scottie and Pascal that you could get away with Pascal playing defense in those roles, and why you don't think Scottie can?
Reactive movement skills. Also, like Pascal's a mirror. Who like has a really good reactive athleticism. Like Pascal can, shift his feet 3 or 4 times and still get a good contest on people. and still like he can get beat and recover. And Scottie's just not that kind of like, he's not that style of athlete. I don't want to say kind because like athleticism, people like hear different things. So I'm trying to be really specific with the words, but like the idea is that like styles of athleticism, the style that Scottie moves is not perfect for the hyper athletic ones. Like Ja Morant is like hard no. Never ever would I want him on Ja, because Ja moves in a way that Scottie just like kind of can't. Whereas like more twos that are less like jitterbuggy and more smooth would be good.
Like DeMar.
Yeah.
DeMar is not a jitterbug.
Yeah. I mean, like even Beal, I think he could do. I think he would be much better on like a Beal style. I think Beal might be a touch on the outside fringe, but like in the archetype of Beal, where it's like Beal wins more with smooth than with like bap bap and gone. And so like at a lower level of that, I feel like you would be okay with Scottie, but like Ja would be like a ask for a different assignment kind of situation.
Okay,
I think you would want to guard Ja. I think, to be honest, arguing this with Scottie, I cannot imagine being the person who's like, "Hey, you can't guard him." But that seems like a terrible job. You have to find the most charismatic guy on staff to convince him that actually this other job is more important, because he's going to be like, "No, I want to guard him. I want to put him in give me him on an island." You're like, "No, Scottie. Hey, this off ball role is so much more important." Like, think about it. Like, that's the mainstream movie. Like, I'm over here like, this is the art house role, like this is the one people are like, you're going to get awards. He's like, no, but I want the don't envy the person who has to tell him that.
Yeah. I did want to dig in a little bit, because Raptors fans, from what I'm seeing, from what I'm hearing, have been sold on the 1 through 5 and have seen the clips of him eating up college point guards. So they might be disaffected hearing that you don't want him guarding the 1. So I just wanted you to make like a very specific case. And personally, I'm very happy with that case. But okay, let's do some Twitter questions regarding Scottie Barnes, if that works with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. From Jeff Lowe, what's a realistic expectation for Barnes in year 1? And you can parse that. I'll give my own after you, and you can parse it out in what. Yeah.
I would say a realistic expectation is struggles with shooting volume, has like really interesting feel flashes, and like looks like an adult on defense. Like, won't look like a rookie in terms of scheme, but will have moments where he tries to challenge, like literally what we just talked about, where he tries to challenge a little bit outside of his physical limitation, and like will look like a bad defender because he's not being optimized in that moment. So like, I think he's going to have to learn the hard way that he can't switch on to ones. And he's going to learn the hard way that he is not a primary rim protector. So like, I think if he learns those lessons and that like starts to fix the shooting volume, then we're in a good place for like, that's a good rookie year. Learning those lessons and starting to fix the shooting volume, good rookie year. Nothing else really matters to me.
Yeah, for myself, I think if I can offer a little bit of a different view than PD, Raptors fans, every fan base is a little bit more in tune to certain parts of the on-court flow and feel because of what they've been subjected to from their team. Raptors fans are a little bit more conscientious in noticing, hey, this is really strong movement across the back end of the court. Like, oh, what's the court coverage here? Like, oh, wow, an X out. Maybe not an X out for every Raptors fan, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But Scottie Barnes will probably get a lot of positive attention from writers and from fans for his court coverage. And there'll be a lot of clips, tracking him, like, look where he started. He's got 2 closeouts and then he recovered to the corner for, a block or something like that. And I think fans will really appreciate that about him. There's going to be quite a few really fun pop plays in transition, whether that's him finishing or whether that's him with like a no look, live dribble pass to a guy coming in from another lane. I think that stuff will be there, but I don't think there's like a rookie of the year case to be made here. And, I think it would be quite an accomplishment within the framework of like how many good players there are coming out of the draft. If he was first team all rookie, I think that would be a tremendous outcome for him, but maybe that's not in the cards. But lots of fun things at the very least. PD said before and quite a few times in this podcast, vibes. So yeah, I think that's a good answer for that. You're welcome for letting you go first, PD. But okay, We have the Freddie Gillespie fan club at Pack Attack, who has been on this podcast before. Quote, given the Raptors' track record of getting guys to improve macro skills like ball handling and shooting, what micro skills does Scottie really need to address to outperform his projection? Additionally, what issues of his are/aren't masked by this current iteration of the Raptors? End quote. Okay, that's for you. That's not really for me, PD, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, it's so wild how you picked all the questions that I have to answer first. Coincidence, I think. So I don't think that there's I think the macro skills are the micro skills. Like the thing with Scottie is that he's here because all the micro skills are like pretty great. Like, yeah, you'd want some finishing craft improvements, especially as like a flasher, or if he's going to run second side pick and roll, you're going to need stuff there. But like, it's also important to note that the Raptors coaching staff that is lauded for shooting and handle development isn't there anymore. Like it is in parts, but like the brain drain has officially begun, and assuming that things in the past will hold to the future isn't necessarily a sound decision making isn't a sound reasoning, because like with every win you get, you have one more eye looking to like, how'd they do that? Hey, can we get him over here? So I don't think you can assume the same rate of development. Also, every player is different. But like, again, I think that he has it's the movement skills laterally to try to get more fluid. It's the flexibility to add wider ranges of motion. It's the explosiveness to pop, and then just shooting and handle. Like it is the macro, and the micro stuff is I would say more body based and optimization based. But yeah, a lot of the little stuff is the stuff that's the best.
Okay. Yeah, I can't really add much to that, but I'll go first on this next one. How concerned we should be about, and this is from Bulat Guzman at Oren Brooklyn. Quote, how concerned we should be about rim protection and defensive rebounding with Siakam, Barnes both on the court, end quote. Yeah, I think extremely concerned, but that's probably not the end goal of that lineup. If that lineup is out there, you're trying to create a lot of turnovers, you're trying to create a lot of certain types of shots, and you actually want to not let the ball get to the rim. You want to be able to stonewall and be very switchable and stuff on the outside. Like, it's not like, a lot of the popular defenses that were played in the playoffs where there's really strong drop going on, and the guy they have dropping is an immense rim protector, and he's eating guys for dinner when they come down into the lane. If you're playing Scottie and Pascal, you're going to struggle immensely on the defensive glass. And probably, even though Pascal, I think, for his position and for his body type, can actually defend the rim quite well. He has a lot of pop getting over there, and his timing appears to be really good. But I still think that's really tough to do. I think you would still, OG is still the nominal, OG and Pascal are switching between the nominal 5 and 4, if that's the case. I don't even think Scottie is fulfilling that role. Do you have any thoughts on that, PD?
Yeah, I think he's going to struggle tremendously, especially when he gets like quick timed. So like I think that he can strength a lot of like the weaker guys. Like he can stonewall people, but like if he has to meet people at the summit or like go get a ball when it's late, he's just not going to be able to do that because he does not have the pop. And I think that there's some misunderstanding about like how his athleticism works. It's not that he's unathletic. It's just that in the way that you would want a rim protector or a play finisher to be athletic, like in specific testing areas, he's really poor, because those are like about, refractory athleticism. How fast can you sprint, hop, and then jump? And yeah, how do you feel about like a Scottie at the 5, Chris Boucher at the 4 lineup?
I don't think Chris Boucher has the court mapping to really move that along. Maybe if he's like really feeling it one day, but I struggle to see that working really well. Yeah. Theoretically, I think you're hitting on something there, though.
Defensively, obviously you'd invert it on offense. But defensively, I mean, the idea being like Scottie sort of like gets vertical and then Boucher is there to clean it up. You would need a hell of a rebounder at the 3. Because like Scottie's a solid defensive rebounder for like sort of like the wing forward that he is at an NBA level. He certainly hustles, but like you do not want him to be the primary rebounder, and playing him with Boucher, well, it sounds really fun. Like you're basically going to need a 3 who's like, hey, I need you to be the best 3 rebounder that the world's ever seen. So like, I don't know. I think that there's going to be an adjustment period where people start to realign expectations and also like recognize that like, well, Scottie is a Swiss Army knife. That doesn't mean it's a solution to every lineup. And that like some of these are going to look very funky because like, I don't necessarily want OG covering for him if he's the 5 and OG's the 4. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that's I think that that's an optimization of Scottie to get Scottie to the 5, but it's not like OG can play ISO. Like you can put OG on an island to be cool. You can't be an island defender and a help side guy. Like that's so much work, and it's offsetting because like what happens if they put like the star in the slot? You can't really help over. What are you supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. That's great point. The cool thing is that while some of this might sound like it's down on Scottie Barnes, a lot of the things that we're listing as positive are things that you'll actually pick up and you'll appreciate. And there are things that are a little bit under talked about as far as how defense works. And a lot of it is just attributed to like, well, it's intangible, but it's partly intangible, but it's partly, Scottie's physical and athletic makeup that will allow him to succeed in ways that fans will realize as the season goes on, and you'll get more accustomed to. I mean, everybody has plays from OG or Pascal or Boucher, and Boucher being, the most fallible defender of all, but they have signature plays, things that you've come to recognize they're very good at. Yuta Watanabe is maybe, one of the best closeout guys in the whole league. So it'll come along, and I think we'll enjoy the defensive prowess of Scottie in a bunch of different ways. Here's something that we kind of addressed, but just a short answer on it since they asked the question. From that_ball player, quote, would Scottie ever consider running center one day and point guard the other day, depending on the matchups and roster availability, since he is a player that has the capability of playing 1 through 5? So just if you have a summary on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Scottie is going to be a possessional player 1 through 5. So like there are possessions and there are lineups where like you'd have him be as the strong side or one protector and he would initiate offenses against certain coverages against certain teams. But like having him be a full-time point guard is a misallocation of resources because like he's a good like for the style of player he is, he's a good ball handler. So leverage that because like if he's bringing up the ball, like you're just going to put a guard on him. And like he struggles to create against guards sometimes. So like I think that one of the benefits of a Swiss Army knife is that there are a lot of mismatches. It's just that like in the NBA, you want to target those mismatches so that they cause advantage. And that advantage doesn't happen 94 feet from the hoop. It doesn't happen putting a guy directly in front of the rim on defense. It happens by targeting moments that can start runs. The runs change the lineup, and then you're comfortable like getting a 4-0 run here because you went to a weird, snug pick and roll look. You got a 5-0 run here because you had Scottie at the 5 and you blitzed every pick and roll for 3 possessions and you just turn it off. I think that Nurse is specifically qualified to do a lot of that, where he just like will be like, this is the lineup where we do with this weird thing, and this is the lineup where we do with this weird thing. But the idea of him, sliding between these things, like there's times where he'll bring up the ball to initiate a specific set. That is a fantastic thing for his position. That's a fantastic thing for his versatility. But the idea of him being like Ben Simmons, where it's just like he's the full-time one, and then on defense he does this. I think that is I think that that's a bit aspirational and not in a bad way. Like I think that he is a specific type of fun player. It's just like there's a lot more wrinkles to it than a guy like Ben, who's pretty flat. Like he does 2 things really well, and everything else is kind of question marks. Where Scottie does a lot of things pretty well, and you have to figure out how to maximize that.
And that's often you don't want to send those players into a specific role. You want them to leverage those talents against like-sized or like skilled players, something like that. But I think that's just because you have point guard skills doesn't mean you go to the one. Like Giannis Antetokounmpo coming out of the draft, everybody was like, oh, he has point guard skills, he could be a 6'9" point guard. And now he's what Giannis is, which is based on his athletic profile at his size, one of the most unique players to ever come into the NBA. And, a finals MVP and an NBA champion. And it has nothing to do with being a point guard. It is almost the exact inverse. So, just let players grow and try and develop them. And, I don't see him as a 1 or anything like that.
This is I think I speak for you here when I say this is a pro-weirdness podcast. And you want to bring that you want to bring that weirdness to your position rather than being like, oh, instead of being like a point guard who can kind of dribble, you're a 5 who can really dribble. And that like those adjectives slide by position and by usage. And the more weird you can be at your position, the more valuable it is versus like being competent. Like Ben Simmons is like a competent rim runner, but you don't necessarily want to play him at the 5 full time.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Row Chicken 1 also asked about Scottie at the point and says, thank you for the pod so far. We answered the Scottie at the point thing, but thank you. I'm glad you appreciate the podcast. Very nice to hear that. Sam from Kate B. Doll. Sam, thanks for this. A question, why is Scottie so perfect? Thanks again. I'll hang up and listen. So this probably just gives us an opportunity to talk about Scottie.
The vibes.
Yeah, the vibes. If you want to lead off on vibes, what you think of Scottie so far? Draft outfits. He was wearing some dunks coming off the plane. Like, what are your thoughts on Scottie, the person?
I mean, the stories you hear behind the scenes about Scottie are just like, seems like the most well-adjusted and like self-aware young man you'll ever see. Like he shakes everybody's hand. He tries to learn as much as he can about like the staffers. He's trying to make sure that everybody's having a good time. He's making sure that he's not obtrusive in any way. He's bringing energy to every single practice because one, he needs it, but he knows that like life is better when other people are also smiling. And like he could not clap and have fun, but like why not have fun? I love that he hasn't taken the hat off.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't either if I got drafted. I miss his hair. I would like him to grow his hair back. He used to have like really big hair, couple like just big twists. When he shaved it going into his senior year, it was really hard to find him because that's just like the only thing I knew him as. I'm hoping it makes a comeback. I think the Dunks are a inferior shoe to a lot of other Nike models. I don't appreciate I appreciate their comeback because I am a Jordan 1 and Blazer guy, and Blazers were hot like 10 years ago. I grabbed a whole bunch of them. I've wrote it out because there's a simple high top, very, a lot of options, but not, it's a classic silhouette. And then about 3 years ago, they jumped off, driving the prices of all the Blazers I hadn't gotten yet really high, frustrating. And so the Dunk came back, and suddenly the interest in the Blazers fallen off. Prices are back normal. I appreciate that. So, well, I don't own any Dunks. I plan to own any Dunks. I think the Dunks are, the lesser stepchild of a number of Nike silhouettes. I am appreciative of the buzz that they have because it takes the heat off of some of the stuff I do like.
We're almost in the exact same boat. Ones and Blazers to me, that's just it. And Chucks. I like Chucks a lot too. Go ahead.
They're a little unsupportive.
Yeah, totally.
I just, my feet are jacked from a life of basketball. So I can't quite do it. I'm also not on like the Aspiladra or however you say, like the cotton shoes. They're like, they're basically sandals with like a piece of cloth over top. I can't do those either. Those made a comeback like 5 years ago. And it's just like, look, man, I have some special needs. Just like cover my gnarly feet, give me a clean, easy look. And just, I can mess with some of the high Dunks, but every single time I'm like, what I really wish was this is a pair of ones.
Yes.
Like every good dunk, I'm like, you know what this reminds me of? Some Chicago ones. Or like, oh, this reminds me of, and the answer is always like a nice pair of Blazers. Though I will say I don't like the double tongue GTs or the double, like the ones with the high gator on them.
Are those the Sakai's?
No, they're the Blazers. You'll see some of the like newer models that kind of have like a second piece of canvas around the toes.
Okay, yes.
That's a little too busy for me. I feel like they do some weird color blocking there. Just want like a solid color blocking. We can get crazy with colors, but I like it clean and easy throughout the thing. But yeah, Dunks are they're a little bit too Diet Coke for me.
I'll never have a Dunk. Never will. But I do appreciate the Blazer love. What's your favorite Blazer color? Like what's the Do you got the Maroons, the UNC Blues? Like, what's the move for you?
There is a pack from 2008 called the Tech Pack that use a multiple interesting materials. There's one that's like Tech Fleece, but it's really padded. You have one that's like a suede, and then a third one that is sort of like the same material that like bombers are made out of. Bomber jacket, not planes. So like, yeah, those are my three go-tos that I wear probably the most. Also like the Tods, which are a red and black flannel pair. And I love a tonal shoe generally. Like tonal, if a shoe is tonal and it has some different materials, like I'm very in on that.
My favorite pair of Blazers I have is they came out like maybe a year and a half ago. It's tumbled leather and snakeskin, well, faux snakeskin, but they're red on the inside, blue on the outside swoosh, and that's for me. That's what I like. That's my favorite pair. I also have like I'm a derivative of hype beast culture because I have the CDG Converse because of course, but yeah, Jordan 1s are like everything to me. I also like Jordan 4s a lot.
Yeah, we've talked about. I own one pair of Jordan 4s. I mean, we're here at one, so just like, can I get your two favorite ones? You don't have to own them, just like the ones that you love.
Okay. That's a really good question. I think my favorite pair of ones, I was really, when I first got into shoes, I was really obsessed with the band ones. But I think it's probably Chicago's and the UNC's. I think they're both really classic, and I think that like the UNC is a super fun color pop, and the Chicago's are maybe the most iconic shoe ever outside of, Converse, and that's just because Converse is so much cheaper.
Okay, I mean, I can get there. I will say that I really like the Lance Mountain Nest Jordan ones.
Yeah. Very cool.
This is again another take.
White or black pair?
I like the white pair. I like my shoes worn. Having new shoes gives me an anxiety attack. So the first thing that I look at when I get new shoes is how will they look when they're beat. And getting shoes that age well, so like nice leather materials that you can just have for like 10 years, is important. So like the white black ones, the Lance Mountains in either pair. The Kentuckys are one that I've really warmed on recently. That dark blue. This has been color talk.
I don't like the Kentuckys. Like they're a good shoe, but that'd be probably lower tier for me, honestly.
Okay. If you had to pick one from the college, so you're picking the UNCs. We're talking like white and the original UNCs, the white with the Carolina blue, over Kentucky's, over UNLV, over I guess the newer like Michigan pair, which is blue body, yellow colorings. Yeah, yes. I mean, for me, it's just I love a good midnight navy.
On my hats, I do. I have a Yankees and a Tigers hat, so I like it on a cap.
I've seen it as an everyday wear shoe, and it looks phenomenal. Again, a very well worn Jordan 1, like the I'm sure like the toe the heel is like diagonal from just a heel drag or whatever. To me, that's the best looking shoe when beat, and I will be acquiring a pair at some point in the near future.
I have for the Love of the Game pack, the metallic red pair. And basically the toe cap is like completely ripped apart because I played so much basketball in that shoe. And that's one of my favorite things is that I've played basketball in like Yeezys. I've played basketball most recently in the Harden Volume 5s. And man, which are a terrible shoe. If anybody's listening, don't buy that shoe, please. It won't fit your foot properly. James Harden, I don't know if this was more in tune with what he wears or if this was just a way to like package a failed Kanye West design into a shoe, which worked on me, but it's that's not a shoe. But you can hoop in Air Jordan 1s and I think you'll just walk away fine. I could hoop in that shoe all day long.
Yeah, that's not for my feet. I'm a tall, skinny person, so I have those like really high insole feet, and boy, imagining hooping in like Jordan 4s like gives me anxiety.
I played in Jordan 14s and I rolled my ankle the first time I ever played in them.
I will say the worst shoe experience I ever had was when I was in high school. We were sponsored by Adidas, and we were given the Pro Model. And Pro Model is like a shell toe shoe with really solid sides. Like, I mean, just like it is a shoe that you could never even like fold even a little bit. The thing is, it's solid. And my foot did not, like, I had to wear like 4 pairs of socks to play in them. And it felt like the inside of a scuba shoe to me. Like, it just like if I like slid my foot side to side, it's totally possible. And these things were like as choked up to see as they could be. It's some gnarly foot action afterwards. Very tough. Now we've talked about good footwears.
Good footwears, yeah. We went for quite a while. I might have to stitch this into the back end. We'll see. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Johnson and Banton. I'll introduce this in a better question format than just reading this. But okay, David Johnson, who Henry Ward will probably come on and wax poetic about in a few days. But what are your thoughts on him? Initially, if I remember correctly, when we talked about second round guys, that was one of the guys that you kind of deferred on because you said you hadn't finished your scouting on them yet. But what do you think now?
I mean, they've definitely fit an archetype because like they're big playmakers. Like both of them have real passing chops. Both of them aren't necessarily aren't good at creating an advantage, but like when they do get advantage, they can make good decisions. Again, both are much bigger than are bigger playmakers positionally. Banton's probably a better shooter. Johnson has some Johnson's issues though. Like, I mean, I think Johnson's the better prospect by a good amount. But like he just struggled to like really show that much his second year. Like he at Louisville, the first year was much more promising. The second year they had some like trouble figuring out like the relationship, like the on ball duties with Carl Jones, and just like across the board, you're just like, okay, that's cool. Like, yeah, you're showing like there's a lot of flashes, but like there's some whole games just like you kind of didn't feel like he was there. But he shot 38% from three, so I don't really think he's a 38% 3-point shooter. It looks good on the numbers, but like the rest of the sample doesn't really hold that. Does not, for a dude who's built like a tank and has like really nice runway athleticism, just doesn't get fouled. Some of this is handles, some of this is his movement style, some of this is finishing package. To me, he's like a prime candidate to get to the like use the G League pathway and be bouncing between the 9 and 5. He seems like a guy who could play NBA minutes quickly, but like you just want to get him more because he kind of had, I don't want to say a lost developmental year, but like a more sideways developmental year at Louisville his sophomore season. Again, the flashes are really interesting. The positional rebound is interesting, but like you just need more in any direction from him. And the easiest way to get there is like got to get to the free throw line. I mean, I'll say that with basically any guard that you point me to, with the exception of one. And this might be my time to segue to something that Dalano Banton is a very interesting prospect. He has an interesting mix of being 6'9" and having passing chops and interesting movement skills. But like you needed to pick Sharif Cooper. Sharif Cooper had a 50 free throw rate in the SEC and is the best player in this class at getting 2 feet in the paint. I understand that the Raptors have an aversion to small players at the one after it's like somewhat failed experiments with smaller point guards. Sharif is like pretty slight, but he's like over 6 feet tall. Have multiple teams are in the process. And I believe shooting to be the easiest thing to fix, like broadly speaking. If your concern is though, like, does he shoot? It's like, well, If he's a backup point guard, he'll put 2 feet in the paint every single time. And if you're envisioning a world where you have 4 6'9" dudes who are all strong, like I think you can slip in one dude who can't really play defense. Like you built a construction for that. I thought it was like the clearest thing in the world that one of these picks was going to be Sharif Cooper, and it just wasn't. Like, full disclosure, I would have, if I were in the Raptors war room, I would have made a strong case for picking Sharif Cooper at 4. Because he has 2 superlative skills in this draft, because next year has no point guards, like basically at all. Like all the way down. It's maybe one of the most barren point guard spots or like primary creator guard spots in the last like 10 years. And there's not a real guarantee that like they'll have a long-term replacement. And I think that if you can get a valuable rookie point guard, that's a very, very easy cheat code to team building. It's sort of like as the Bucks kind of learned with Brogdon. That's my own. Like, if you're going to continue to take these bets on 6'8" guys, you have to mix it up with dudes who 100% will create advantage, because neither Banton or Johnson or even like Scottie like are advantage creators in the sense that you would think of ball in hand. So to offset, like if you're gonna, the ratio doesn't have to be 1-to-1, but pick one of Johnson or Banton, whichever one is higher on your board, and then take a big old swing with Cooper, knowing that like he does things that no one else on this roster can do. Like even Fred doesn't have that level of separation.
Mm-hmm. This might be an unfair ask of me, but I use the term advantage creation all the time. So do you. It's growing in popularity, but for the listener who's saying, you keep saying advantage creation, but these are just basketball players. Do you have anybody in mind that you could say they plateaued because they didn't have this? And so realistically, that's why it's such an important part of your heuristic, your calculus into what makes, maybe Sharif Cooper, a guy who went, 48th, could have been considered at number 4. Like there's a bit of a crossing of the wires there, right?
Yeah. Raptors fans are extremely familiar with the playoff struggles of DeMar DeRozan. There's a player who can get shots, but does he get in the playoffs? Did DeMar DeRozan get easy looks at the rim or create rotations so that other players got easy looks? No. Did that mean that like when he was relegated into a role where that wasn't important, he became more valuable? But as a primary creator, he did not cause advantage, which to me is anytime a defense is in rotation or forcing a defense to make a hard decision. So it's like you're downhill, you have 2 feet in the paint, and the corner defender has to, or the defender has to choose between stepping up to challenge at the rim or stick with the shooter in the corner. If you can't get to that spot, you struggle with advantage creation, just from having the ball on the perimeter. This roster doesn't necessarily have that. Like OG is the best bet for that. I think Pascal. I lean more towards like, I don't want to say like Tampa was real, but like I don't think that I would want Pascal creating from a flat situation. I think OG is a better bet for that. It's also like the way Pascal moves is best attacking a defense that's already tilted. It's so unpredictable. It's so I want to go to him later in clocks, but as the primary action, I don't necessarily want him as the guy up top. It also makes it easier for him to get in the flow with open catch and shoot jumpers. I think like it's not a knock on him being like the primary option, but necessarily having to make all of the primary advantage and decision making. Like you can be the best player on the floor and not bring the ball up, or not run the first pick and roll. It wouldn't hurt to have a guy who every single time there's a pick and roll is a serious threat to get downhill and will cause rotations. That's my biggest concern with this Raptors draft, and maybe it could solve in free agency, or if there is a trade, or a million of things that can happen between now and when they toss the ball in the air in the first game of the season. But the Raptors are one of those teams that like can get caught in ugly games and get caught in like really ugly series of possessions because there's nobody who creates that advantage every time down, or threatens that advantage, or defenses have to truly worry about it. And I think that's when teams are talking. When there is Twitter slander about Pascal, and which is all terribly misguided because he's an awesome player, I think what they're actually referring to is roster construction, and that he's being asked to do something that isn't necessarily his optimal role, and that all the team has to do is just simply give him 10% less creation usage in specific circumstances, and everything makes sense.
But also the types of situations they put him in, there's no screen help. There's nothing like that either. It's just an isolation at the 45 extended. is a huge ask for, as you say, a guy like Pascal Siakam who is syncopated, is starting from a flat situation. That's really tough and just requires on these a lot of craft that I guess he's not comfortable applying in those types of situations. And anybody who watched in 2018-19, where he had this incredible bag of finishes, a wide array of shoulder slots and finishing angles, and could go off the glass at 36 miles an hour or 0.2. Like, it's just had a bunch of things in his bag. When the defender isn't catching up, when the defender is sitting right on him, he isn't on balance to make those kinds of plays. And it showed. I mean, I think you and I might disagree actually on OG Anunoby and Pascal, like who would be better, and maybe we'll have that discussion later on. But that's a great point about the advantage creation, though.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that is my concern with the way that this roster is being built. Is that like there are a lot of 6'8", 6'9" guys with the same creation profile, and like, in my mind, that's the best time to start swinging. This is my same argument for the Knicks taking Sharif or a player like Sharif. It's just like, you have an awesome defense, so you can take one of those guards off, know that the defense will still probably be awesome, and get a new dynamic, get a player who does operate and move differently and have a different usage and be more comfortable in those spaces where, like, Pascal doesn't have to create from an ISO from 45 7 times a game. What if it's 2? What if the defender doesn't get to see that much of his side steps or that much? So now the optimization probably goes up because the defender hasn't seen it. You know, if you play a team 4 times, now they've had 30 isolations at the end of the clock against Pascal. On number 28 or after number 28, they probably know everything that he's got. Mm-hmm. And they're probably pretty comfortable. But if it's been, 4 games and they've seen 2 possessions each time, after 7, they're not feeling great. I think that by minimizing the specific, troubles with an advantage creator, even if it's just a couple times a game, is going to do a lot for everybody. And like, those players are not necessarily easy to come by. And I think that the idea was Fred VanVleet was going to do it, but it's also like not necessarily where his bag of tricks lies.
Mm-hmm. It's not very tenable. The point you make about the Raptors being caught up in kind of a slog at times definitely resonates offensively. But for viewers, you probably do recognize how the Raptors work like hell to mitigate inherent advantages that other teams are getting when they have a decent to really good advantage creator. And it takes, a Herculean effort by a defense to really mitigate that, to make that not work, and to recover and rotate, to make sure that there's no advantage created, to stop it in its tracks, or even to recover after an advantage is created. That's incredible defense. And the Raptors can get there with, an array of guys on the roster. But offensively, as PD says, you can see it is just not there. So Sharif would have been really, really interesting. And I think it'll be tough to sell people on maybe even selecting him at 4, because if he goes 48, why'd you pick him at 4? But it's not about, where he gets picked. It's not about that. It's about introducing versatility to a roster and advantage creation to the roster. So I understand why you were disappointed with no Sharif. But
yeah, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily need to be a Sharif. Like, I mean, if you had flipped, I mean, granted, like David Johnson is going to be a great like pick for this roster. It's that, like, I would like to see gambles on that archetype. So whether it's like, whether it's buying a pick to try to get, or trading one of those and buying a pick to try to get up to, like, Bones Highland, who creates advantage, like players that are outside the 6'9" profile. Like, there's going to need to be some swings on those guys. And I just thought that there was an interesting one available at the slot, knowing that that's where this roster is moving. And like, that's the type of dude who does get overpaid. So like, if your choice is like gamble on a smaller guy who you could always like, don't worry about it in 2 years. Like, it's not, nobody's going to get, Masai's not going to get in trouble for missing it, a pick in the mid 40s. This seems like a really high risk or low risk, high reward gamble, and getting as many of those as possible for a good team is always important, especially when you have a developmental framework that you think can optimize guys like that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that takes us to, kind of the end of the podcast as far as the draft stuff. And I want to talk to you about kind of the league, and the Sharif Cooper thing should segue nicely in that if the Raptors are just grabbing a bunch of the 6'9" guys and, Bobby Webster maybe it's just a sound bite for people to run with. Maybe that's actually how he intends the roster to be built. But grabbing like-sized guys and then teaching them skills, you can't teach everything, and you can't get everything to, a level where it can be leveraged against NBA defenses. And the Raptors have taught a lot of stuff and have developed a lot of stuff, but it's really difficult to develop like dominant advantage creation or dominant pull-up shooting and that kind of stuff. And those two go hand in hand a lot of the time too. But guards in the NBA, they loom a lot larger. I think there's an undercurrent now of people saying, are guards starting to be undervalued? The wing agenda has been very big for quite a few years now. What do you make of lead guards in the NBA at this point in time?
I think that there's been a natural counter movement of wings getting all of the decision making and figuring out the best way of optimizing guards without having them take the ball out of like a good playmaking wing's hands. So like this was sort of my argument for like Jalen Green being awesome, is like he doesn't have to make decisions. You can use him in the Chris Finch version of Ant-Man role. You can sort of use him in a guard version of Zion role, where it's like have him always catch the ball with a crazy tilt. Like defenses are going to be so worried about him dunking on people that like it allow you to run secondary offense out of his his cutting gravity, out of the lob gravity. And that if you can just, get his motor revving to always see that stuff, like you can run some really interesting things out of it while pairing, like you could have a Gordon Hayward have the ball in his hands and it would still be maximizing Jalen Green. Now with point guards, there's always going to be a pushback because every 5'11" dude is going to feel a type of way when you're like, yeah, you're not dribbling no more. Their entire life, they've dribbled a bunch and suddenly they're not going to. I think that dislocating what we would consider like star skills, like, pull-up shooting, the ability to like finish really well, like those are the things that are going to start mattering more to point guards. Again, this is why I bring up Bones Hyland, because Bones Hyland is a hilarious shooter, and that he shoots from like he has range that I would broadly describe as like the first 6 rows. And it's going to be really fun seeing him with Jokic, but like you don't need him to make decisions. You can run him off actions. Like he might be the point guard nominally in a lineup if you're playing, 4, 6, 9 dudes, because he'd be the smallest guy on the court, but he wouldn't have what we would consider point guard decision-making load. So I think that the revenge of the point guards is becoming the hyper efficient, like play finishers, but, essentially being the DeAndre Jordan of point guards, where you don't have to make a whole bunch of decisions. If you're playing with like, if you're playing with Braun, like what decisions are you supposed to be making? That's not like they kick it to you if you think first clause isn't there, then you can work a little bit. But it's having, instead of point guard being a connector idea, it's them being play finishers. It's them being the ability to space, gravitate, and optimize your either heliocentric wing, heavy playmaking wing, or motion-based offense. And I think that that's what we can generally consider like backup point guards. But like, imagine if you taught a hyper athletic point guard the lessons of Jalen Brunson. So they're going to be like, oh wait, there's money in that, and I can get to the rim. Oh, there's a lot here. So I think that that's certainly a pathway. And like, well, Sharif is not that, because Sharif was the best passer in the draft, so he could actually like make a huge volume of decisions. I think that as you get more comfortable with a wing like OG or Pascal, running 30 pick and rolls a game or whatever, finding a point guard that can be synergistic with that development idea, who's not going to be like, well, now I'm here, so that number goes down, is important. It's just that's not how we've traditionally thought about things.
Okay, and then so that segues really nicely into Kyle Lowry, a guy who can find synergy seemingly with anybody and appears to be on the sunset of his time with the Raptors. Who knows if it's Miami, Dallas, New Orleans, but what do you think of, his next contract? How are you expecting him to age gracefully? What are your thoughts on Kyle Lowry and maybe the next chapter?
I mean, has Kyle Lowry ever done anything gracefully? Like it's not really how his game works, Like it's fits and starts and charges and explosions, and emotion. Like, I think that like being the level of shooter that he is basically going to keep him, like, he could be Jose Calderon forever. But like, yeah, I assume he's going to get a max. Like, that's always what I've assumed. I mean, it doesn't matter how much Mike Conley takes. Like, the Maverick, that Mike Conley being off the market doesn't make the Mavs need him less. It doesn't make Miami need him less. If anything, you can say it drives his market value up because he's going to be like, oh no, like, you guys really need me now because you can't even bid me against Mike Conley. Yeah, I think that he'll age well. I think that things will go well. I mean, obviously the rim volume is going to shrink. The reliance on grifting is going to go up. The defensive versatility, like, I think that you're not going to want him on true point guards anymore, and you're going to see more of him guarding the worst wing on the floor, able to body them up. And obviously, when you're a small guy, you get a pass to just like do reckless violence, which is just one of those baked in things that referees seem to allow. I'm letting little dudes get away with whatever. So yeah, I think it'll go good. He seems to be hunting, good fits, which, like, most other guys do, but also those good fits seem to be offering quite a bit of money, which is a win-win. Yeah, I don't have any real concern. Like, I'm also not like a contracts guy, so it's like, oh, that contract might be $5 million underwater. It's like, well, I mean, if he's optimizing Luka, like, who cares?
That's with Luka, you're going to have a couple different eras. If you handle him correctly, if you make him happy, you get a few different windows of championship contention. So, like, hell yeah, spend the money, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't spend the $5 million, like, I'm sure that'll go over well with him. He's like, yeah, we lost 10 extra games this year. However, we saved $5 million. Like, I'm sure he'd love that.
Right.
Him and Lowry essentially being wired the exact same.
Yeah. Dallas is my favorite landing spot for him too.
Oh, I just really complaining. It would be just like, they'll have sprints to the referee and like, tell me you don't want to see like an offensive foul get called on some random like rookie or whatever, and those two just run over to just like have a meeting with a referee. He's like, whoa, what of you? They have to like Rochambeau to figure out who's going to harass a league employee for 5 minutes.
Yeah, beautiful. It's fantastic stuff. Okay, one last question before I pick your brain on OG, because I really like that. Gary Trent Jr., rumored by Raptors Spaces today with Jake Fisher, somewhere in the realm of 3 years, $50 million. I don't know if incentives are included in that. A lot of contracts have incentives, but that doesn't really get reported outside of like beat reporters being like, hey, by the way, this is, kind of couched into the contract. But he might be part of the Raptors. Maybe he won't be. Who knows who's going to try and be competitive with that? He's restricted. Gary Trent Jr., when I watched every usage point of his Portland Trailblazers season, including, a handful of games. But I just want to see when he's ending possessions, what is happening. And I don't see much of a path forward for Gary Trent Jr. to a much better player outside of just becoming a staggeringly good shot maker. And I think he's at the point where he's a good shot maker and not great, not anything like that. But is there any reason to feel either more optimistic than I currently do or more pessimistic?
I mean, I guess the other way would be like extreme shot versatility, where he's like capable of shooting with crazy negative momentum. And like, he's a very good shooter. Like, but I don't really see that happening, where it's like, can he get on the like Duncan Robinson diet of jumpers? Which again is like
grenade DHOs into the corner. Like
to be 100% clear, like that is the world's hardest shot selection. And to shoot well on that means that you're like one of the 5 best shooters on the face of the earth. That's a pretty difficult pitch. Especially like, I think that one of the things with like Gary Trent Jr. is he's again, contracts to me are just like the money doesn't matter if you have the team. Like $17 million to a team that needs shot making is totally different than $17 million to a team that's like, yeah, we like shooters, but like we have a bunch of them. Like if your team is starved for shot making, you have the passers, you have the advantage creators, but you don't have anybody to like put the ball in the hole. Like, yeah, 17, totally. Do you think the Raptors are a team that needs shot making? Do you think that's the best allocation of resources?
No, I don't. But I also like they need And that's the thing too. Like Gary Trent Jr., he gets his shots out of, dribble handoffs, out of like floppy sets, out of pin downs and flares. And you could do that for a lot of players, I think. And I think you can approach a similar amount of efficiency and volume on the aggregate. And you could also have better defense in the lineup. Now, I understand why people, players are not assets, but you don't want to lose the value in the market that Norman Powell presented, and you traded to get Gary Trent Jr. And if you're trying to build a team and these guys operate as if they have value in the market and you're trying to win a championship, this sounds dumb because I'm trying not to speak about players in a dehumanizing way, but it's just
they are contracts. Like
yeah.
Not that the players are, but like I think that the only way I can really look at it is that like you're thinking about contracts as a puzzle, which is like not dehumanizing. Like for me, when I think of like, oh yeah, contracts are a puzzle, it has nothing to do with the player. It's just
right.
Like, does $17 million fit into our puzzle of our team contracts? And it's like for some people, absolutely. For other people, no. And I feel like that's when you talk about a guy as a bad contract, like I kind of think that there isn't any, because you can always generally, like with the exception of like the summer 16 deals where like teams just went a little crazy, for the most part, people are with like it is capable for almost everybody to reach their general contract value.
Yeah, Kennard in the playoffs when he had 3 games where he was providing stuff, you're like, oh hell yeah, 16, like put it on the board.
Like I'm sure that if you ask them like how much is a playoff win worth, they'd probably be like a couple $1 million probably. They're like cool. Like realistically, it doesn't matter. Like if you win 3 playoff games, like you're worth whatever contract. I just I struggle with that same thing where I was like contracts skeeve me out. Like they really do. And thinking of the team fit within a contract as puzzles is probably closer. Cause like, I mean, the other systems where like Chris Paul might not be able to earn $44 million makes sense. Yeah, probably. Like I'm sure that like if he was on the Cavs, like that's probably not the best allocation of resources. But like if you put him in a good situation, like he's worth every single cent of whatever the number is. Again, if guys get hurt, that's different. And at that point, we're like not really talking about the same dude. But yeah, puzzles is the best I have. If there's somebody else has something better, please let me know, because yeah, contracts are weird.
Okay, so I would say with Gary Trent Jr., I think it is worthwhile if him not being there at a $17 to $20 million price allows for you to have some sort of flexibility to take a shot on a player. Like, it doesn't have to be Malik Monk, but a player who has a higher upside at advantage creation. I think that is a more worthwhile route. If that isn't available to the Raptors and they want to ride out what they have going, then yeah, you sign Gary Trent Jr. and you hope that he, as still a fairly young player in the NBA, continues to develop in meaningful ways. Is some craft going to come along? Maybe. It didn't seem likely from what I saw on film. Like there's just a very strong aversion to contact that he has. He has, a bit of shot versatility in getting away from contact. He's got a handful of step backs and side steps and all that kind of stuff. And he's a shooter. But yeah, if there's a route to a player with a more desirable skill set, then I would let Gary Trent Jr. walk at that price point. But that's a lot of hypotheticals.
It's sort of the best way to do things. Okay, so do you now want to segue into the OG Anunoby?
Yes, please. Okay. I'm going to clip this actually and tweet it at Emma Brown once you finish up. So OG Anunoby as perhaps the best creator on the Raptors. What's the pitch?
I mean, the pitch is that like there's enough passing there that he merits. Like I say this is like I do not want Pascal running a X amount of frontside pick and rolls. Like there is a hard limit for me, and given this roster construction and given the way that like I've seen him be successful, I want him to have an amount just to get him comfortable, but I don't want to go over a certain amount. Lowry is most likely gone. Fred has limitations, so like who's taking the rest of these pick and rolls? Like Scottie's running a small amount. I would much rather have him as the role man in any of these. So like, what's the next best option?
I would think I like Pascal. Now, I don't want to get into the Pascal OG thing. Maybe we'll have that discussion like later on. But let's go with OG. Let's give him a handful of stuff and let's see what you think.
Yeah. I mean, last year he shot almost 40% from three. The year before he shot almost 40% from three. I don't think it's unreasonable to start asking him to take more off the dribble jumpers. The progression is pretty intense, and I think that like with his with the height of his release point, like the idea of him rejecting a pick and roll into a sidestep isn't like an insane proposition. And like people are going, I think that even if he misses more this year, even if the numbers drop down to like 35, 36%, that like if teams step forward at all, he can get by them with strength. And this is a pathway for him getting additional advantage creation because like that environment is huge for his stride length. That's where he is most comfortable, is when people are side by side with him, he's actually a step ahead because he can just length out and then length extend. I also just want to see the limitations of his passing. Because like there's stuff there. And I feel like it hasn't, with Lowry, there's just an amount of pick and rolls that like other people are going to get. And I don't even think it has to necessarily be pick and rolls, but like OG has consistently proven to be a smart one more passer who has a read for advantage. And even if it's just like him trying to pick out slight advantages, will bode well if you find another advantage, if you eventually a trade is made for another, on-ball star and OG remains, that will add to his usage going forward. Like this is going to be his age 24 season. This is, he's had, one game with 43 games, 1 year, a year where he didn't start at all. This is the time to really experiment and see like what he can add now that he's proven exactly what type of player he is and like what general usage works. I mean, we had another scoring bump last year. This to me, this seems as the experimental season because you always know that you can get a guy who will just take a whole bunch of on-ball reps. So if you can get OG just like, I don't want to say like the Zach LaVine point guard year, but it's the same idea of like throw him into new contexts, see what he gets. And even if he ends up not succeeding, that will be, seasoning for the role he eventually has on the next playoff team.
Finding out OG Anunoby's threshold is probably the most important indicator for what the Raptors can do as far as team building goes. So I agree with you 100%. His pull-up shot, I think he went like 30. I was tracking this last year or this season. I think he went 32 3-point attempts in between makes. And he had a really weird 3-point pull-up thing that happened. And none of the process looked bad. It was just a really strange outlier because the year before he actually had quite a bit of success with it. And just a weird thing. He was a little bit more hesitant to take him this year. But I don't see anything wrong with the mechanics. Like he's a pretty clean shooter. So like you say, to get into, a sidestep or any type of pickup point where he gets comfortable and has that high release point that he shot over a lot of good contests as a pick and pop guy, just trying to apply that is very meaningful.
He's very comfortable with the escape sidestep out of hard closeouts. Like that is his favorite thing. And one of my favorite things about his game is like, if you hard close out, it's just pound, dribble, sidestep, pull. So it's like, okay, same footwork pattern. If they hedge or if they stunt you at this pick and roll, hard pound, sidestep, pull. And I mean, like the distance he covers on those steps make it even if his like gather point is a little bit lower than I think you'd want, like his process is like a little, he doesn't shoot at like the Kuzma above your head point, which you'd kind of think for a guy. His is a little bit more in front of his face. The distance he covers on those side steps is going to be so big that kind of mitigates it. This is like the sort of revelation Dame learned as a one-step guy, where it's like if you get it out quick enough, it doesn't really matter your release point as long as you're creating distance on. If you're releasing quick enough and you're creating is like that sidestep as big as possible, then it doesn't matter. So for me, if he can add that will start to add a lot more of the pick and roll coverages you ideally want for his strength level and for his movement skills. You get those, and then it's like experimenting with snakes, experimenting with, step backs out of snakes, experimenting with the passing reads out of those things. Like to me, I think that there is a section of analysis I've seen. It's like, well, Scottie's going to have all those possessions. I'm like, I would prefer that not happen.
Mhm.
I would prefer all of those possessions go to OG with Scottie getting, some like transition double drags and stuff like that. Like imagine a Scottie double drag where OG pops out of it to, run a 45 and then you pick and roll out of that. So it's like you get an OG pop, and then if that's not there, then Scottie goes back and rescreens. And now we're into a very fun action where a team has to decide, like, how hard did you close out on OG the first time? Do you go under that pick and roll? Because, he's proven to be somewhat comfortable shooting off the dribble, going at least to his right. Like, that's how I would start many Scottie OG possessions if they're the two bigs on the floor, or, it's those two and Boucher or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It should be interesting. I do like that, though. OG. I hope he has a big year. But okay, do you have like a version of him in mind that he can hit? Like, it doesn't have to be, the clearest picture, but a blurry vision of an optimized, willing to meet his threshold OG. What does that look like to you?
It'd probably be taking 30% of his shots off the dribble as self-created shots, or 30% of his shots as self-created off the dribble shots. That would be huge. Forcing pick and roll alternatives, because I feel like with OG, he's at the level where like teams have one way they guard him depending on defender, and they kind of stick with it. I don't see, like with Pascal, teams have to shift depending on how the game goes. Like when he starts knocking down threes, that coverage shifts really fast. And depending on what kind of rim protection they have, they'll try to shove him different ways. I feel like with OG, they have an idea and they stick with it. And I would just like a successful season is one where he takes more off the dribble, where he is capable of forcing and recognizing different pick and roll coverages. And we just get to see like exactly where the extremes of his game are. Because again, even if this is not his long-term role, he's now this, like when you average about 18 points per 36, like you're at the point where you need to figure out how high this could go. Mm-hmm. And because he's so versatile, like it's tempting to be like, oh, we'll give him a little this, a little that. Like, no, he should probably, you need at least 1 year. And this last year obviously would have been preferable to try to just like, force feed him possessions, because like last year was obviously fake and we know that. But unless we're talking about OG shooting numbers, and then they're extremely real. It's the only thing that's real. But like this season, I think the most important thing for me is just like his defensive archetype is really set. His offensive archetype has quite a bit of, I don't want to say question marks, but like the outline of it could be so many different things. Mm-hmm. We have some central ideas, like great slasher, has a lot of comfort out of, catch and shoot opportunities, with side steps, with a whole bunch of like little skill points. But where are the limits on ball? Where are the limits as a passer? Where's the limits in his handle? Can he shoot, can he, redirect a couple of times and then, punch step to get into a jumper? I think that like this is an opportunity for him to add a bunch of finishing craft. Like if you're going to go to 5 dudes of the same build and same size, like this is your current bet on the roster of being a guy who can do a lot of those things, because like he's just more comfortable shooting off in a lot of different ways than OG is, and certainly much more comfortable than Scottie is.
Mm-hmm. Also, that's if you can get the pull up going and your mechanics are like friendly to that, who's the easiest line to draw? Like Kyle Lowry, his pull up had a huge correlation with his finishing at the rim. Mm-hmm. Victor Oladipo is probably the best, right? The jump from Oklahoma City to Indiana legitimately became an all-NBA guy because the rim was wide open for him once he started even shooting an okay number pulling up. Just even, because it opened up so much.
Just taking. A lot of times it's just taking because teams are just like, I can't give this up.
Yeah. So, I mean, Oladipo, I would say actually, despite the size difference, how he was utilized in OKC and how OG is utilized in Toronto, there's some overlap there. Not a ton, but I could see if you want that role shift for OG, I would love that this year. You've sold me on it.
I'm glad to welcome you to the Church of OG Optimism.
Okay. I think I was there already. What?
But you ascended.
Yeah, right. I feel like, don't tell anybody, but I feel like I speak the OG stuff during the season. I like every season, if someone writes a more expansive like detail of OG's game, I'm disappointed. I feel like that's my job to communicate. So you've given me something to think about.
I'm glad to be of any service I can be.
Okay. Feels like a podcast. How do you feel?
I feel great. A busy day, covered a lot of ground, not dissimilar to an OG closeout. Talk shoes, talk rookies, talked some roster building theory, talked about a way to talk about the contracts without being dehumanizing. A lot of ground. Now, I feel like I'm like 80% of the way of getting like a signed, sealed, delivered Canadian passport at this point.
Yeah. I mean, hey, it's yours when you want it, dude. You just have to show up at customs.
Beautiful.
That's you've got a bunch of people have signed off on it. But okay. Hey, just want to thank you a bunch, but the floor is yours to plug away on anything you want.
Yeah. If you would like to see a truncated breakdown on Scottie Barnes' game, did a marathon stream right before the draft, where I invited a whole bunch of people in the basketball community. I don't even want to say draft because I'd like talking to coaches and trainers and everybody, and did a Let's Watch film on Scottie with the wonderful scout Michael Eisenberg, who's I believe Canadian. So again, another person vouching for me in that customs process. This is about 25 minutes. Talk about strengths, weaknesses, just the exuberance. There is a link to that in the in my Twitter. I have a thread where it talks about every prospect that I talked about. I also talked about in that mega stream, which took many years off my life. They talked about David Johnson and his pathways to development with Henry Ward, which is also really fun. I'm sure that'll get plugged when you guys talk, or else.
The Banton Blake episode never came to fruition.
Yeah. If you'd like to read my writing, it's on Patreon. The work is always free, but if you could donate a couple bucks, it'd be much appreciated. I'll pay for stats, video packages, and video editing packages now. All of my videos are on YouTube. Let's Watch Film series, which is a series where I talk about a single game from a prospect, talk about micro skills, talk about things they can improve on. Have like 18 I think that I did for this draft cycle, not counting the marathon streams, ranging from like Kate Cunningham all the way down to like Kessler Edwards at 45. I think that they're really good, really fun, and a way of onboarding a lot of these ideas that we talked about. I'm trying to make basketball as accessible as possible. So, it's about talking people through flex screens and also like if you're a hardcore draft head, maybe, we're talking about it at different levels at the same time. So I think it's something for everybody, and trying to make this stuff not scary so that everyone feels welcome in this accepting community.
Because this stuff is intimidating. Like right off the jump, you start hearing a bunch of terms that don't seem like they fit into, a basketball, into the gym. They're actually very understandable and they fit very well. But all that stuff will be linked. PD's YouTube will be linked. His Twitch will be linked. The specific episodes will be linked, as will his Patreon. And PD, thank you so much for coming on. And listener, once again, cannot co-sign PD's stuff enough. I think that, I wouldn't say derivative, but I think he helps inform the conversation on a lot of things. He is respected as somebody who does so. And I am happy anytime I can have him on this podcast because the insights and knowledge just come flowing out. And anybody who likes Blazers and ones, they can come on the pod. That's how I feel.
That's really, there was an open call for shoe appreciation. And I was like, I know a little bit about basketball now. So he's like, yeah, I guess we'll touch on that. So
right.
That was the origin of me coming on. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure that we will talk. I would love to have you on a Let's Watch Film from the Summer League to talk about a Scottie Barnes game or a David Johnson game.
Hell yeah, brother. That's a deal.
Because things are quiet now. Get to Vegas and I gotta start clipping games. Be in the gym while clipping, which is my favorite thing to do. Just thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. My second, I feel like Knicks fans adopted me initially. Now they push me out because they got successful. And they don't need me anymore because they're in the playoffs or whatever. As long as y'all remain bad, I'm here for you.
From each poverty franchise to the next. That's you're like there's what is it? The Littlest Hobo. It's Canadian a Canadian television program. It was a little dog that, well, not a little dog, it's a big dog that went from town to town helping solve things that were going wrong in the township. And it was on the Canadian Broadcasting Channel.
This is some sort of like Scooby-Doo-esque program that y'all didn't have Scooby-Doo?
It was live action, though. It was live action. It was a real dog.
Sorry?
It was live action. A real dog.
I'm gonna need this to look at this later. I don't believe you, but hey.
I mean, I'm not above doing like bits and not relenting, but this is real. When you look it up, you'll probably be very, very pleased. But okay, let's we'll discuss Let's Watch Film and Littlest Hobo off the pod. But PD, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, and listener, thank you for tuning in. This was a long one, maybe the longest one I've done on the podcast, possibly. Actually, I think it is. So PD and I are setting records. But thank you for tuning in, whether you got into it in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day, and goodbye.